Hello and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Maybe you've already found your favorite nighttime spot, tucked into bed, lights dimmed, or curled up in a quiet corner where the world feels a little slower. Wherever you are, awake, half dreaming, or somewhere beautifully in between, I've saved this little stretch of night just for you. A calm place where curiosity and stillness can sit side by side. Tonight's story takes us to a place most people think they already know, a land of endless sand and scorching sun, a place most imagine as empty with endless dunes, dry winds, and silence. The Sahara Desert. Tonight we're going to drift, slowly and gently, beneath the golden surface of the largest hot desert on Earth, because buried under millennia of dust and time, scientists have discovered something remarkable. Discoveries so deep, so quietly powerful, they're changing what we thought we knew about our planet, our past, and even ourselves. I should probably tell you now, I've done my best to make this story as sleepy and soothing as possible. But some of these revelations are so strange, so gently mind-bending, that your mind may drift wide awake with curiosity. But that's okay. They'll settle again soon, a little wiser, a little more amazed. And if you're enjoying this cozy pocket of the evening already, I'd be so grateful if you gently tap the like button or subscribe to join this little community of sleepy explorers. And if you're listening from somewhere special, a city balcony, a tiny town, or your favorite cozy chair, tell me in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy science map stretches across the globe. And just a reminder, this video is here to calm, not to instruct. No pressure to remember facts or stay alert. Just relax, breathe, and let the desert speak. So now close your eyes if you like, take a slow breath in, and let it go. And together, let's drift softly, curiously into the ancient secrets sleeping just beneath the Sahara, where something old is beginning to wake. The Sahara is often imagined as endless, a golden sea of silence and sand, stretching farther than the eye can see. If you stood right in the middle of it with no roads, no buildings, no footprints, you might feel like you were at the edge of the world. Nothing but warm wind brushing your cheeks and dunes rolling like waves in every direction. It covers nearly a third of Africa, almost as wide as the United States, 1,200 miles from north to south, more than 3,000 from east to west. It touches 11 countries, from Morocco and Mauritania in the west to Egypt and Sudan in the east. It's so vast that even from space you can see its sandy fingerprint carved across the continent. And yet, despite all its size, the Sahara can feel strangely still, as if time slows down here. The wind shapes the dunes slowly, patiently, with no need to rush. Each gust carves soft ridges into the sand, curves that shift with every sunrise and vanish with every storm. And when the wind finally rests, what's left is something close to sacred, a silence so deep it almost hums. But that silence is a bit of an illusion, because the Sahara hasn't always looked this way. Beneath the dunes, beneath the dry silence and relentless heat, lies a memory, a hidden story that stretches back thousands of years, a story scientists are only now beginning to understand. Hidden under the surface is a whisper of something long forgotten, a hint of rivers, of forests, of lakes and grasslands, even animals that don't belong in a desert at all. It's hard to picture, standing in the shadow of a dune, but scientists now believe the Sahara was once green, very green. Rivers once snaked across this landscape, stretching for hundreds of miles. Lakes bloomed in the lowlands, vast enough to rival small seas. Herds of elephants roamed here, giraffes, antelope, and people too, hunters, gatherers, families who painted their lives on cave walls and built homes beside the water's edge. They thrived in a land teeming with life, all of it now buried, gone from sight but not from memory. The desert has hidden this chapter beneath layers of sand and time. It presents itself as dry, still, lifeless, but underneath, the clues are waiting, scattered like breadcrumbs across a forgotten landscape. You just have to know where to look. That's the Sahara's illusion. It isn't just a desert, it's a mask, a place pretending to be simple, empty, final, but it's not. It's layered, mysterious, alive in ways we're only beginning to uncover. The sand hides the truth, but modern tools, satellites, radar, ground penetrating sensors are peeling back the veil. And what they're revealing is reshaping how we understand not only the Sahara, but the ancient rhythms of our entire planet. So tonight, let's keep going deeper into the desert, not with footsteps, but with questions, because just beneath that soft surface, something unexpected waits, and maybe it's been waiting for us to listen. If the Sahara we see today is only the surface, then what lies beneath is a memory of something very different. Scientists call it the African humid period, a time when the desert wasn't a desert at all, but a sprawling savanna teeming with life. It began over 10,000 years ago, after the last ice age released its grip on the earth. As global temperatures slowly warmed, monsoon rains shifted northward, carried by changing atmospheric patterns. These rains, once limited to Central Africa, began to fall over the Sahara, and they didn't just sprinkle the landscape, they transformed it. With steady rains came rivers, with rivers came grass, and with grass came life. The land blossomed. What we now know as barren sand was once covered in tall grasses that danced with the wind, trees clustered near riverbanks, wetlands formed in low-lying areas, lakes spread across vast basins, some stretching for hundreds of miles, deep and full, and brimming with freshwater fish. And where there was water, there was movement. Herds of animals migrated with the seasons, much like they do today in East Africa. Elephants wandered beneath shade trees. Hippos and crocodiles basked along riverbanks. Birds flocked to the lakes by the thousands, filling the skies with motion and sound. Human life flourished too. Nomadic communities followed game trails, fished the lakes, and built temporary homes from reeds and mud. They left behind traces of their days, flint tools, pottery, even artwork scratched and painted onto rocky cliffs. In one cave in what is now the Libyan desert, a painting shows swimmers, not mythic, not imagined, but real people gliding through real water. The cave is still there. The water, of course, is long gone. This was not a short moment in time. The Green Sahara, as scientists now call it, lasted for thousands of years, long enough for ecosystems to stabilize, for generations of humans to live and die under green canopies, for animals to establish migration routes that stretched from one end of the region to the other. And yet, what made this world possible was not permanent. The same climate forces that brought rain could take it away. Bit by bit, the monsoons weakened, rainfall grew less predictable, rivers shrank, lakes dried out, and slowly the greenery began to fade. Trees withered, grasses turned brittle, the animals moved south. People followed, leaving behind the traces of a life that had once thrived where sand now rules. But the memory of it remained, not just in human memory, but in the earth itself, in the clay of an ancient lake bed, in the pollen trapped beneath rock, in the bones of a gazelle found hundreds of miles from where any grass grows today. And as we explore deeper into these traces, it becomes clear the Sahara isn't just a desert shaped by wind and heat, it's a landscape shaped by time, by climate, and by the ever-shifting balance between dryness and life. Even now, scientists are finding new pieces of this puzzle, But to understand how they know what they know, how they're piecing together this long lost world, we have to look closer at the ground beneath their feet and the clues nature left behind. The whispers of the Green Sahara didn't come from grand monuments or ancient books. They came from the tiniest and most fragile things, things you'd never expect to survive the weight of time. A single grain of pollen, no bigger than a speck of dust, can carry the scent of a world long gone. In dried out lake beds scattered across the desert, researchers began collecting soil cores, long cylinders of layered earth that reveal the story of the land year by year. Each layer is like a page in a diary, and hidden in those layers are pollen grains, locked in place for thousands of years. Under a microscope, each one blooms into a tiny fingerprint shaped like no other. Some come from grasses, others from flowering plants or trees that no longer grow anywhere near the desert. What makes this even more powerful is how specific pollen can be. A pollen grain from a palm tree is not the same as one from an acacia. Scientists can tell what types of plants were growing nearby just by identifying the shape and texture of these grains. In layer after layer, stretching back 10,000 years, they began to find evidence of thick vegetation, savanna grasses, shrubs, even species that only grow near permanent sources of water. But pollen wasn't the only thing the desert had quietly kept safe. Scattered across the Sahara, often in the most unexpected places, scientists began uncovering the fossilized remains of trees, not just driftwood or scattered branches, but tree stumps, still rooted in place, their trunks turned to stone by time and pressure. Some lie alone, exposed by shifting sands. Others are part of ancient forests, now buried deep beneath dunes. These petrified remnants speak of a time when roots could sink deep into rich, moist soil, when trees reached upward to catch rain that fell reliably, season after season. And then came the bones. In dry valleys and rocky basins, archaeologists uncovered skeletons of animals that should never have been in a desert: elephants, antelope, Nile perch, even crocodiles, their remains found hundreds of miles from the nearest modern river. Some were scattered, others arranged as if they had been carefully buried. A few were even found alongside human tools, stone points, scrapers, fishing hooks, signs of a time when humans lived alongside these animals, not as distant observers, but as neighbors. One remarkable discovery came from a place called Gobero, in what is now Niger. There, researchers found an entire cemetery, people laid to rest beside one another, their skeletons remarkably well preserved in what used to be the shoreline of an ancient lake. Some of the graves included grave goods, jewelry made from shells, pottery fragments, even bones of fish placed beside the dead, suggesting lives tied closely to water. These findings didn't arrive all at once. They surfaced over decades, pieced together by teams working in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. But as the evidence grew, grain by grain, bone by bone, a new picture began to form. Not just a green Sahara, but a Sahara alive with stories. Stories written not in ink, but in the language of ancient pollen, silent stones, and forgotten skeletons. And as researchers listened more closely, they began to wonder, if all this life once bloomed here, what else might still lie hidden just beneath the surface? The answer came not in a whisper, but in something far more astonishing: the fossil of a creature that shouldn't belong in a desert at all. What came next was something that didn't quite make sense, not at first glance, because in the middle of a parched, sun-cracked landscape, where the nearest ocean is hundreds of miles away, scientists began to find bones that belonged to creatures of the sea. In a remote stretch of the Egyptian Sahara called Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales, paleontologists unearthed what looked like the fossilized remains of gigantic fish. But they weren't fish at all. They were whales, ancient ones, some over 50 feet long, their curved spines arched through the sand like skeletons still swimming beneath the surface. These weren't modern whales, they were early ancestors, creatures that once had tiny hind limbs, traces of a time when their kind still walked on land. And yet here they were, frozen in stone, right in the heart of the desert. Dozens of them, entire families. Some were found mid swim, as if the ocean had vanished around them in an instant, leaving only their bones to remember the tides. It sounds impossible, but these fossils told a quiet, astonishing truth that this part of the Sahara was once the floor of a vast, shallow sea, not just a lake, but a warm marine ecosystem teeming with life. Alongside the whales, scientists discovered remains of sawfish, sharks, sea cows, and even coral like formations. Every layer of stone preserved a different ripple in time, each one whispering that this desert had once been blue instead of gold, and the sea was only part of the story. Far from Wadi al Hitan, in regions scattered across Chad, Libya, Niger, and Mali, researchers began uncovering bones from creatures that belonged not to the sea, but to grasslands, woodlands, and wetlands. There were elephant tusks, wide and curved, buried deep beneath dunes, skulls of hippopotamuses with jaws still gaping, bones of giraffes, antelope, even lions, animals that need space, shade, and plenty of water to survive. In some places, the remains of crocodiles appeared, perfectly preserved in ancient mud turned to stone. Some of them were massive, over 30 feet long, far larger than their modern cousins. Their presence was a clue not just to freshwater, but to an entire ecosystem built around rivers and lakes that once carved their way through what is now dry basin. What made these finds even more remarkable wasn't just that the bones existed, but where they were found. Some were embedded in rock formations that had once been riverbanks. Others were discovered lying in open sand, uncovered by wind or seasonal shifts, their shapes so intact it seemed as if they'd just been resting beneath the surface, waiting. Scientists also began finding clusters of fossils, not just of animals, but of entire food chains. Fish near crocodiles, grassers near predators, water dwelling species beside land mammals, all layered together in a fossilized memory of a thriving, complex world. And in between them, sometimes mixed into the same strata, were signs of early human presence, footprints hardened into clay, or spear tips buried among rib cages. These discoveries painted a world no longer imagined, but undeniable. The Sahara had not only been alive, it had once been teeming, a place where ocean waves curled over whales, where crocodiles basked in riverbanks, and where elephants wandered through green plains that stretched far beyond the horizon. But the question remained, what happened? What could turn a land so full of water and life into the dry, silent expanse we see today? The answer wasn't hidden in the bones, but in something even older, something written in the stars, the tilt of the earth, and the rhythm of time itself. As the bones of ancient creatures were slowly pieced together, forming a picture of a world both familiar and forgotten, scientists began searching for something even more elusive, not just the remnants of what lived in this lost landscape, but the paths it once flowed through. And that's when they found it. Not by digging, but by looking down from far above, from satellites orbiting Earth, equipped with powerful radar that could penetrate the sand. What they saw wasn't visible to the naked eye. There were no traces on the surface, no rippling water or carved banks. But beneath the golden dunes, something extraordinary began to take shape. A shadow, a pattern, a ghost of something long gone, yet not entirely erased. It looked like a river, not a small one, not even a large one, but a giant, a prehistoric vein stretching thousands of miles beneath the Sahara. winding and branching like an ancient artery frozen in time. Scientists called it the Tamanrasset River, named after a region in southern Algeria where part of its hidden path seemed to run. And if it were flowing today, it would be one of the longest rivers in the world, rivaling even the Nile. The Tamanrasset didn't just snake quietly through a corner of the desert. It stretched across countries, from the highlands of the Atlas Mountains in the north all the way to the Atlantic Ocean in the west. Radar data revealed its vast network, tributaries feeding into a main channel, wide basins where it would have pooled into lakes, and deep valleys carved through bedrock long before the first grains of desert sand settled on top. This wasn't just a trick of geology. The shape was unmistakably that of a river system, and not a dry one. This had been a river of power, moving with enough force to shape the land around it. Some of its channels were over a mile wide. That kind of erosion doesn't happen slowly, and it doesn't happen in dry places. It takes time, volume, and motion, the kind of flow that sustains entire ecosystems. And the more researchers examined the data, the more connections they made. Ancient lake beds, once thought isolated, turned out to be part of the Tamanrasset's vast catchment. Fossil sites where hippos and crocs had been discovered, now aligned with old tributaries. Even human settlements, long lost rock dwellings and cave paintings, clustered along what would have been fertile floodplains. This hidden river system didn't just hint at a greener Sahara, it confirmed it. The desert we know today had once been deeply, thoroughly wet, and not in patches, but as part of a sweeping, interconnected web of water that brought life to an entire region. What's even more astonishing is how the Tamanrasset vanished. It didn't dry up in a day, or even in a single generation. Its disappearance was slow. Gradual changes in Earth's orbit shifted the monsoon rains that once fed it. As the climate shifted, the skies gave less, and the land held on until it couldn't anymore. The river narrowed, split, and eventually went quiet, buried under wind-blown dunes and forgotten for thousands of years. Until now. And while the river no longer flows on the surface, it may not be entirely gone. Deep underground, aquifers, pockets of ancient water still follow parts of the Tamanrasset's old path. These hidden reservoirs, some buried miles below, may hold the last echoes of a river that once carved through continents. But the Tamanrasset wasn't the only thing revealed by radar. In peeling back the layers of the desert, scientists stumbled across something even more mysterious. Not just a path or a channel, but structures, geometric shapes, patterns that didn't look natural, as if beneath the Sahara, the river had passed not only through forests and savannas, but something built. And so, as we follow the trail of water through this vast golden silence, we find ourselves approaching not just forgotten landscapes, but whispers of civilizations, ones that may have flourished along the riverbanks before vanishing beneath the sand. And somewhere in that silence, another question begins to rise. Not just who lived here, but what did they leave behind? The discovery of the Tamanrasset River was only the beginning. Once scientists realized what the desert had been hiding all this time, the question shifted from what happened here to what else are we missing? But answers wouldn't come from shovels or digging. The Sahara is too vast, too delicate, too layered with time. It would take centuries to excavate even a fraction of it by hand. And so researchers turned to something quieter, smarter, tools that could see without touching. High above the earth, orbiting silently, satellites became their eyes. Modern satellites are not like the ones from decades past. These are equipped with instruments that don't just snap photographs. They scan, they measure, they read heat, reflectivity, moisture, even chemical composition. They see what human eyes cannot. And when combined with ground penetrating radar, the sand becomes almost transparent. It starts with layers. Radar sends signals into the ground, and depending on what those signals bounce off, scientists can map structures buried meters, even miles below the surface. The echoes paint a ghostly outline of what lies hidden: dry riverbeds, ancient stone foundations, underground lakes, even walls and roads that haven't seen sunlight in 10,000 years. Some of the images are so detailed they resemble X rays of the earth: smooth curves of old riverbanks, sharp corners that suggest man made design, clusters of anomalies that hint at forgotten settlements, possibly entire communities swallowed by time. But gathering the data is only one part of the puzzle. Making sense of it, that's where the real breakthrough lies. That's where artificial intelligence comes in. AI is now being trained to sift through endless terabytes of satellite and radar information, a job that would take humans decades in mere hours. It learns to recognize patterns. It notices things researchers might overlook: a shape that seems too symmetrical to be natural, a formation repeated across regions separated by hundreds of miles, clues that the human brain might dismiss as coincidence, but the machine sees as consistent. AI doesn't get tired. It doesn't skip over something because it looks unimportant. It combs every inch of every image, pixel by pixel, and begins to highlight places where something might be hidden, not with certainty, but with precision, a nudge, a direction to look more closely. With these tools, researchers have begun building digital reconstructions of the Sahara's buried past, three-dimensional maps that allow them to walk through landscapes that no longer exist on the surface. They can trace the bends of rivers that vanished thousands of years ago, fly over valleys that are now buried in silence, pinpoint ancient watering holes where wildlife once gathered. And as the data improves, so do the models. Some can simulate rainfall from 10,000 years ago. Others estimate how long a lake may have lasted based on the depth of sediment. Every scan, every layer, every line of code helps fill in a piece of the larger story, a story too complex, too old, and too fragile to be told by digging alone. What's perhaps most magical is how non invasive this work is. There's no need to disturb sacred ground, no need to break open delicate ecosystems that have formed over millennia. The desert remains untouched, calm, and whole, and yet its secrets are being gently drawn to the surface, not through force, but through listening. Some researchers call it whisper archaeology, a method of uncovering the past without harming the present, a way of respecting what's buried while still allowing it to speak. And as the technology improves, so does our ability to hear those whispers more clearly. What once looked like endless sand now becomes a living map, not of what is, but of what was. A forgotten world rising faintly through data, slowly assembling itself from shadows and reflections. But even as the riverbeds and lake shores reappear, and long buried villages begin to outline themselves in code, a deeper mystery stirs beneath the surface. Because alongside natural formations and animal traces, some of what's being uncovered doesn't look natural at all. Lines too straight, shapes too exact, markings that suggest purpose. And so now, the tools turn not just toward landscapes, but toward the possibility of lost civilizations, ones that lived beside rivers that no longer flow, built with stones now hidden beneath centuries of silence, and may have left behind knowledge we've yet to rediscover. Somewhere beneath the soft hush of desert winds, a memory lingers, not carved in stone or written in books, but etched in layers of forgotten earth, a memory of movement, of water, of flow. Long after the satellites revealed the ghost of the Tamanrasset River, scientists began uncovering signs that the Sahara wasn't home to just one vanished river, but to an entire web of them, a vast, complex network that once wove through the desert like a circulatory system beneath skin. These were not mere trickles or dried up streams. They were rivers of size and strength, capable of shaping the land, nourishing entire ecosystems, and connecting distant corners of a once lush land. Using ground penetrating radar and satellite imaging, researchers began to trace the outlines of these invisible waterways, channels carved deep into ancient sediment, now buried under meters of sand. Some are so wide and long they rival modern rivers. One such system, hidden beneath the Libyan desert, is nearly as extensive as the Nile itself. Others, like those stretching into Algeria and Mali, once fed basins that grew into enormous lakes, some larger than modern day countries. They call them ghost rivers, not because they haunt the land, but because they once lived. They flowed freely through what we now call desert, cutting paths through hills, feeding grasslands, and inviting herds of animals to drink along their banks. The Sahara, back then, was not a wasteland, but a gathering place. Rivers were the threads that tied it together. And where rivers run, lakes tend to gather. Across the Sahara, buried under centuries of shifting dunes, lie fossil lakes, ancient bodies of water that once shimmered under the same sun, now baking the sand above. These were no ordinary ponds or puddles. Some stretched over hundreds of square miles. One of the largest, known as Lake Megachad, once covered more surface area than all of the Great Lakes combined. Its outline, faintly visible from space, shows how far the shoreline once reached into what is now dry scrubland and cracked clay. Sediment cores pulled from these ancient lake beds still carry stories. Tiny shells from freshwater snails, layers of silt laid down by waves, grains of pollen from plants that no longer grow in this part of the world. Each layer a soft echo from a time when these fossil lakes mirrored clouds and reflected trees long before the winds buried them. Some lakes likely lasted thousands of years, replenished by seasonal rains and meltwater flowing down from distant highlands. Others were more temporary, swelling during wet periods and shrinking when the skies turned dry. But all of them served as vital waypoints for life. People settled along their shores, animals grazed and hunted in the grasslands that surrounded them, and over time, as the climate shifted, these watery sanctuaries faded, not all at once, but gradually, like a candle flickering out. Yet their outlines remain. Modern imaging has revealed entire basins beneath the surface, complete with ancient shorelines, beach ridges, and even deltas, places where rivers once fanned out and gently fed the lakes. Some of these regions are still marked by subtle depressions in the terrain, now filled with sand, but shaped by the memory of water. They call these paleochannels, the bones of old rivers and lake systems that once brought life to the Sahara. And every year, new ones are discovered. With each scan, the map grows, connecting dots that were once scattered across time. What once looked like an unbroken desert now resembles a forgotten mosaic of lakes and rivers, bound together by invisible flow. In some regions, there's more than just evidence of where water once was. There are signs that water might still be hiding. Beneath certain fossil lake beds, scientists have detected large reserves of fossil groundwater, not flowing anymore, but preserved, locked in aquifers, sealed beneath layers of clay and stone. These ancient stores of water are like time capsules, sealed away since the days when elephants roamed grassy plains and crocodiles sun themselves on muddy banks. And while the rivers and lakes themselves have long disappeared, they shaped everything that came after. They carved valleys that later became caravan routes. They nourished soil that still supports rare desert plants. They created oases that dot the landscape even today, small green reminders of the larger worlds that came before. So, as scientists continue tracing these buried waters, they're not just mapping forgotten geography, they're unveiling an ancient rhythm, a heartbeat that once pulsed across the Sahara, a rhythm of rain and drought, of rivers and stillness, of a land that held more water than most can imagine. And somewhere beneath the dunes, that rhythm is still echoing, waiting to be heard. Even after the last surface lake vanished and the final river channel ran dry, the Sahara didn't become completely lifeless. Beneath the silence and heat, water didn't disappear. It retreated. It sank into the ground, filtered through ancient rock, and settled into chambers deep below the surface, hidden, preserved, waiting. These underground water stores are called aquifers, natural reservoirs trapped between layers of porous rock and sealed in by denser stone. While they don't flow like rivers or ripple like lakes, they hold astonishing amounts of water, some untouched for tens of thousands of years. One of the most important and vast is the Nubian sandstone aquifer system. It stretches beneath parts of Libya, Egypt, Chad, and Sudan, a reservoir so large it could in theory provide fresh water for centuries. This aquifer formed during those wetter times when rain fell regularly and rivers crisscrossed the land. Instead of running off or evaporating, some of that water seeped down deep into sandstone layers and stayed there, locked away from the thirsty sky above. Scientists discovered the Nubian aquifer not through digging wells blindly, but with tools capable of seeing beneath the earth. Radar imaging, seismic surveys, and satellite data revealed the boundaries of this buried ocean. The water it holds is called fossil water, not because it's made of fossils, but because it comes from a time long gone. It doesn't get replenished by modern rainfall. Once it's pumped out, it's gone. Still, the existence of such a reservoir beneath one of the driest places on Earth is astonishing. It changes what we thought we knew about deserts. It proves that even in landscapes that seem barren, the past can still nourish the present if we know where to look. Other aquifers lie beneath the Sahara too. The northwestern Sahara aquifer system, for example, supports millions of people across Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. Oases that seem like miracles, palm dotted pockets of green surrounded by endless sand, often owe their survival to these invisible rivers below. Wells drilled deep into the desert bring up cold, clear water that may not have seen sunlight since the last ice age. Some of this water travels upward naturally, pushed by pressure in the rocks. In other places, it must be coaxed out, drawn up through pumps and pipes from aquifers hundreds of meters deep. In the Libyan desert, the great man made river project was built to tap into the Nubian aquifer and transport that ancient water to coastal cities. Over thousands of kilometers, buried pipelines carry the desert's hidden legacy toward farms, homes, and industries. The system is so massive it can be seen from space, just like the aquifer itself. But while the discovery of these aquifers is a triumph of science and engineering, it also raises questions. Fossil water is a finite resource. If used too quickly, it won't return in any human lifetime. It's a relic of a different world, one where rain was common and rivers carved the Sahara's face. Today, using it means dipping into a reserve built by nature over tens of thousands of years in just a few decades. Even so, just knowing it's there reshapes how we think about deserts. The Sahara isn't just empty sand, it's a container of memory. Underneath the hot surface, water still whispers. It doesn't run or splash or sparkle in the sun, but it moves quietly, held in the dark spaces between rocks, a slow drip, a soft pressure, a buried sigh. These aquifers also help explain how life clings to such harsh places. Nomadic tribes have long followed water routes, not mapped on any surface. They know where to dig, where springs once bubbled, where a dry patch of ground might hide a trickle just below. Their survival depended on reading signs that science is only now beginning to understand. What may look like empty land is often alive, with moisture, with memory, with potential. And when researchers model the climate of ancient Earth, they now factor in these deep stores. The groundwater levels tell stories about the rain that once fell, about the flow of past rivers, about the great wet pulse that transformed the Sahara again and again. These aquifers hold more than water, they hold clues. As we map more of them, as sensors become sharper and data grows richer, the line between the visible desert and the hidden one keeps blurring. What was once thought of as bone dry now appears soaked in history. Beneath every dune might lie a ghost of water, a buried lake, or a forgotten floodplain. And just as the rivers left traces of flow, these hidden aquifers leave a subtle signature too, a reminder that the Sahara is more than what we see. It holds the past beneath the present, and the story it tells isn't over yet. The presence of hidden water wasn't just a scientific marvel, it was also the reason life once bloomed across this vast land. Where rivers flowed and lakes shimmered, people followed, families built homes, communities rose along the edges of fresh water. They weren't just passing through, they lived here, and they lived well. Long before the sand swept in, long before the last rains disappeared, the Sahara was dotted with civilizations that thrived in what today feels unimaginable. These weren't scattered camps of nomads, but organized groups who adapted to the landscape and left behind a quiet legacy, now buried in dust. Archaeologists began to uncover evidence of these early people, not from monuments or towering structures, but from subtler signs, pieces of pottery, smoothed by hand, arrowheads carved from stone, fragments of tools worn down from daily use. Each discovery added a human fingerprint to the ancient green world. Scientists were beginning to map. At sites like Gobero in modern day Niger, the desert peeled back for just long enough to reveal its secrets. In the dry bed of an ancient lake, researchers found dozens of human skeletons, some lying as if in peaceful sleep, others carefully positioned in what seemed like ceremonial burials. One grave held a woman and two children, their bones intertwined, dusted with red ochre. Necklaces made of shells from distant coasts were still resting around their necks. These people weren't just surviving, they were creating culture. They made art, crafted jewelry, and buried their dead with care. They lived off fish, wild grains, and the animals that once roamed freely. And when the season shifted, they adapted. For a time, the lake at Gobaro dried, and the people vanished. Then rains returned, and so did the settlers, a rhythm tied to water, a pattern mirrored across the Sahara. Further north, rock walls hold stories that outlasted even the people who painted them. In places like the Tassili Niger in Algeria, sandstone cliffs stretch across the desert, etched with thousands of ancient petroglyphs. Some images show hunters chasing giraffes, others depict herders guiding cattle. Even more surprising are scenes of swimmers, human figures gliding through waves, arms stretched forward, legs kicking behind. Images frozen in time, painted on rock, telling us that this land once held lakes deep enough for joy. And where there is water, and food, and shelter, there is trade. Some of these ancient groups traveled vast distances, exchanging tools, spices, and beads across early networks. Traces of their roots are hinted at in rock art styles that spread far from one another, suggesting shared knowledge, shared symbols, shared journeys. The Sahara wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. It connected rather than separated. As the climate shifted again and the rains grew fewer, these civilizations faced a slow retreat. The rivers they relied on shrank, lakes became salt pans, grasslands turned to dust. The people didn't vanish all at once, they moved. Some followed water north, others drifted south into the Sahel, adapting once again, but their presence remained behind, in bones, in carvings, in echoes waiting beneath the sand. And yet, much of their story is still missing. Wind and time erased so much. What we know today comes from the rare places where the desert showed mercy, where the sand acted like a blanket instead of a destroyer, preserving fragments of a life that no one thought to look for until recently. But now that we know it's there, the search has deepened. Archaeologists are using drones, LiDAR, and infrared imaging to detect subtle changes in soil and terrain, hints of buried walls, of long forgotten settlements, of roads once trodden by ancient feet. Even the tools we use to find oil and gas, seismic scanners, magnetic surveys, are now being reimagined to search for cities instead. What was once the domain of geology is merging with anthropology, painting a clearer image of how rich this land once was in both nature and humanity. The Sahara's past is not just one of shifting dunes and dry wind. It's a story of resilience, of people who learned to thrive in cycles of abundance and drought. They left behind no towering pyramids or palaces, but they left behind a map of memory, one that we're only just beginning to trace. And as scientists and historians follow that map deeper into the desert, something even more curious begins to take shape. Not just who these people were, but what they might have passed on. Because beneath these buried settlements lie patterns, alignments, choices in where and how they built, things that hint at knowledge of stars, seasons, and maybe even the rhythm of the planet itself. As traces of lost settlements emerged from the sands, one name began to stand out. Not from whispered legends or myths, but from ruins that refused to stay buried, the Garamantes. While many ancient cultures rose beside rivers or fertile plains, the Garamantes carved their world directly into the heart of the desert. They didn't just survive the harshness of the Sahara, they mastered it. Deep in what is now southwestern Libya, their civilization thrived more than 2,000 years ago, long before Rome reached its peak, before sand covered what had once been green. The Garamantes were already building something remarkable. They chose to settle in one of the most arid regions of the desert, a place where summer temperatures could scorch the earth and rainfall was nearly non existent. And yet they built cities. But their cities weren't like the towering stone capitals found in Europe or along the Nile. Instead, the Garamantes built with earth and sun dried bricks, low structures made to resist the heat and blend into the landscape. Many of their settlements were partially underground, with tunnels and rooms cut into the bedrock, staying cool in the daytime and warm at night. The design was intentional, intelligent, and way ahead of its time. What truly set them apart, however, was their relationship with water. Beneath the surface of the Sahara, as earlier discoveries showed, ancient aquifers still held the memory of a wetter age. The Garamantes tapped into this hidden lifeline using a system so advanced it baffled archaeologists at first glance. They built what are now called fogaras, underground irrigation channels that gently sloped from the foothills to the valleys below. These fogaras tapped into natural groundwater without needing pumps or modern tools. Gravity did the work, drawing water through tunnels that stretched for miles. The channels were maintained with vertical shafts that provided access for repairs and cleaning. From above, they looked like a string of perfectly spaced dots in the sand. From within, they were a marvel of desert engineering. Thanks to this system, the Garamantes could grow crops in the middle of the Sahara. Wheat, barley, dates all thrived in this unlikely oasis. With steady water came stability, and with stability came trade. Their cities became hubs, linking caravans from the Mediterranean to the deeper regions of Africa. They didn't rely solely on what the desert gave them, they reached out, exchanged goods, ideas, and culture. But what's even more striking is how much they understood about their environment. The placement of fogaras required deep knowledge of underground geology. The alignment of their cities hinted at awareness of celestial patterns. Their roads didn't meander randomly across the desert. They followed deliberate paths, optimized for both terrain and climate. These weren't lost wanderers, they were planners, thinkers, and builders who left behind blueprints buried in dust. For years, the Garamantes were little more than a footnote in Roman writings, described as nomadic raiders living beyond the empire's reach. But those records turned out to be incomplete, if not misleading. Roman soldiers may have encountered their outposts and border settlements, but the heart of the Garamantes civilization lay far beyond Roman sight, protected by the desert itself. And unlike the empires that built walls, they built networks unseen, underground, and resilient. Modern researchers began piecing their world together using satellite imagery. From above, faint lines appeared roads, building outlines, irrigation patterns. The desert was slowly revealing what it had hidden for centuries. Excavations confirmed the scale of their innovation. Burial mounds, ceramics, tools, and even writing hinted at a society both complex and self sufficient. And then came something even more unexpected signs of cultural layering. Within their ruins, archaeologists found evidence of multiple waves of occupation and adaptation. The Garamantes didn't appear overnight. Their civilization grew from older communities that had lived through the last gasps of the African humid period. As the land dried, they adapted and kept adapting. Their existence is not just a story of ancient brilliance, but of long term resilience. What's left now is mostly fragments, broken walls, collapsed tunnels, dry wells. But each fragment adds to a larger truth that the Sahara, far from being a barren void, once held a people who understood it deeply, people who harnessed its secrets and lived in harmony with its extremes, people who remind us that ingenuity isn't limited by geography, it's shaped by it. And just beyond the reach of these crumbling cities, another layer of the story waits. Older, quieter, but still pulsing beneath the sand, waiting for its moment to speak. The deeper researchers looked into the lives of the Garamantes, the clearer it became that their survival in the heart of the desert was not a matter of luck, it was engineering, strategy, and a deep understanding of their land. They had no mighty river like the Nile or Euphrates to depend on. Instead, they had something invisible to the eye, buried far beneath their feet, ancient water, trapped underground, left behind from a time when the Sahara had once bloomed. But reaching that water was no easy task. The Garamantes turned to one of the most remarkable solutions in desert history, the Foggara system. These underground irrigation tunnels didn't just tap into water, they unlocked life itself. Each Foggara began at the edge of the highlands, where rain once seeped through porous rock during the Sahara's wetter age. That water gathered slowly over centuries into vast underground reservoirs. The Garamantes found ways to reach it without disturbing the delicate balance of the land above. They dug long horizontal tunnels, sometimes stretching for several kilometers, sloping just enough to let gravity pull the water down toward their settlements. The slope was critical. Too steep, and the water would erode the tunnels. Too flat, and it wouldn't flow. Getting it just right meant observing the land carefully, mapping underground layers by hand, and learning the secrets of soil and rock. Along each tunnel, they dug vertical shafts, narrow, straight down to provide access for construction and cleaning. From the sky, these shafts looked like a dotted line marching across the desert. Below the surface, they formed a quiet highway for water, cool, shaded, and protected from evaporation. The Foggaras delivered a slow, steady flow, enough to grow crops, hydrate animals, and support life in a place where nothing should have grown. At the end of the Foggara, the water emerged into open channels, filling stone lined basins and irrigation ditches. Here, farmers waited with palm fronds, woven baskets, and hand tools, ready to guide every drop into fields that had been carefully shaped for maximum growth with minimal waste. The layout of their farms reflected the same precision as their tunnels. Rows were measured, soil was amended with organic matter, and planting cycles followed the natural rhythms of desert seasons. The crops they chose were suited for survival. Dates, for instance, thrived in the heat. Their tall palms shaded smaller plants below, like beans, grains, and melons, creating a layered garden that mimicked natural ecosystems. They grew barley and wheat, pressed olives for oil, and harvested desert grasses for livestock. Nothing was wasted. Water was shared, reused, and protected with a care that echoed spiritual respect. But farming alone wasn't enough. As the desert slowly tightened its grip, the Garamantes adapted their lives to match its changing rhythm. They built wind catching towers to cool their underground homes. They stored food in stone granaries that stayed dry and cool through the blistering heat. They moved animals strategically across the landscape, letting fields rest and recover. Every part of their lifestyle balanced energy with efficiency, a constant dance between survival and sustainability. Trade became a survival tool as well. The Garamantes connected distant regions, bringing in goods that couldn't grow in the desert and exchanging salt, dates, and pottery in return. Their caravans followed routes that avoided shifting dunes, and their merchants knew where to find the rarest water holes. In some areas, they even used pack animals to carry water long distances between wells and villages. This delicate system worked for generations. Even as rainfall faded and temperatures rose, they continued adapting. When forests collapsed or dried, they dug new ones. When farmland shrank, they concentrated their efforts, reducing waste. They were not just desert dwellers, they were desert thinkers, adjusting plans based on tiny shifts in wind, dust, and water. Their knowledge wasn't written down in books, but passed through hands from builder to son, from farmer to apprentice. Skills that took decades to master, but could be lost in a single generation. And as the climate turned even harsher, some of those systems began to crack. Water levels dropped, aquifers shrank, fields turned back into sand. But the fact that they endured for as long as they did, thriving where others might have vanished, is a tribute to their quiet brilliance. They didn't bend the desert to their will, they listened to it. studied it, learned its patterns, and in return, it let them stay just long enough to build a world worth remembering. As archaeologists map the ruins of their cities and engineers study the last remaining fagaras, still in use today, one thing becomes clear. Even in a place drying by the year, the Garamantes found a way to make water flow, crops grow, and life bloom. And not far beyond their reach, signs begin to emerge of an even older chapter, a time before the Garamantes, when the desert was not something to conquer, but something to call home. Far before the Garamantes, long before irrigation tunnels and trade routes etched their patterns into the desert, there was another kind of life in the Sahara, not one carved from adaptation, but one born from abundance, not hidden under cities or rock, but resting gently by a lake's edge, waiting. In 2000, deep in the heart of Niger's Tenere Desert, a team of scientists led by Paul Sereno was mapping prehistoric fossil beds when they stumbled on something unexpected. As their jeep crawled over sun-baked ridges and sweeping dunes, a flash of bone caught their eye, not scattered like animal remains, but arranged, deliberate, human, and not just one. Beneath the sand lay the outlines of a burial site, untouched for thousands of years. They had found Gobero, a ghost of a lakeside village from a Sahara, so different it hardly seems real. Where now there is only silence and scorching heat, once stood water, shade, and the gentle murmur of everyday life. For here, in what is now one of the driest places on earth, people once lived, loved, died, and were buried with care. Excavation revealed more than 200 graves, bodies placed in rest, some curled on their sides, others stretched flat. Many wore jewelry made from hippo tusks, fish bones, and polished stones. Some were buried with tools, others with pots, still holding traces of ancient meals. There was no rush to these burials, no sign of violence, only presence, stillness, memory. One grave in particular stopped the team in their tracks. A woman lay on her side, her arms gently extended. A child rested beside her, his head cradled in the crook of her elbow. Another, even smaller child lay near her knees, their tiny bones fragile as paper. Their hands seemed to touch. Around their bodies were delicate flowers, fossilized remnants of petals that had been placed there before burial. A moment frozen in time. A family, perhaps, or simply a gesture of love and death. Either way, the silence around them spoke louder than any ruin. Scientists believe Gobero was home to two waves of people, separated by time and climate. The first group, known as the Kiffians, lived here nearly 10,000 years ago, during the height of the African humid period. They were tall, strong, and well fed, likely fishing the nearby lake and hunting animals that no longer roam the region. The second group, called the Tenarians, arrived thousands of years later after a long dry spell. They were smaller, more delicate. Their tools were lighter, their art more refined. But the lake had returned by then, and with it, life. Both cultures left behind not just bones, but stories written in the shapes of skulls, the curve of pottery, the grains of sediment in their lungs. What makes Gobero so haunting is not just the discovery itself, but the way time seemed to hold its breath around it. The sand had covered the graves like a shroud, protecting them for millennia. There were no ruins, no towering monuments, just the simple fact of human presence. People who once stood where the wind now blows, who drank from a lake that no longer ripples, who left nothing behind but the way they buried their dead. There were no grand tombs, yet the reverence in each burial speaks of a deep connection to place, a belonging that cannot be measured in stone. jewelry carved with care, pots buried beside ribs, necklaces still clasped around fragile vertebrae. It wasn't just survival here, it was culture, meaning, memory. The lake they lived beside has vanished, of course. What remains are its traces: fossilized fish, pollen grains, shells buried in layers of silt. A lake bed that once shimmered now lies flat and cracked. But through the people of Gabero, we catch a glimpse of that other Sahara, the one not written in textbooks, but whispered through wind and bone. Their existence reminds us that the desert is not just a place of dryness and silence. It is a place where time has layered itself like sediment, where stories lie buried just beneath the surface, waiting for the right wind, the right eyes, the right question. And somewhere beyond Gobero, deeper still in the folds of the desert, scientists are following new trails, not just of people, but of language, symbols, and myths. Because when one ancient culture is uncovered, it often points to another still hidden from view. Just beyond the silent graves of Gobero, the sand holds more than bones. It holds the things people once carried, the items they made by hand, wore on their bodies, used to gather food, prepare meals, raise children, and mark the passing of time. Long after their voices faded, their artifacts remained, quiet, buried, but never gone. In different corners of the Sahara, scattered like forgotten memories, these objects have been found one by one. A smooth bracelet, shaped from ivory, beads carved from ostrich eggshells, a tiny comb made of bone, its teeth still evenly spaced. Each one tells a story without words, a glimpse into everyday lives from thousands of years ago, left behind when the lakes dried up and the sand returned. Some discoveries come from burial sites, like those at Gobero, necklaces still draped around neck bones, rings pressed into dry soil near the fingers that once wore them. But others appear far from graves, out in the open desert, after a sandstorm or a shift in the wind. Pieces of pottery will sometimes peek through the dust, shards of bowls, the rim of a drinking cup, the base of a cooking pot still blackened from ancient fires. Their designs are often simple: smooth curves, dotted lines, crosshatch patterns pressed in by hand. But the craftsmanship is clear. These weren't carelessly made, they were shaped with intention, fired with skill, decorated not out of boredom, but beauty. In southern Algeria, in the Tassili Niger region, explorers have found fragments of ancient tools nestled between rocks and dunes, flint blades, stone axes, and arrowheads shaped from volcanic glass. These weren't random rocks, they were tools chosen for sharpness, chipped with precision, and used with experience. Some were likely used for hunting, others for cutting plants or scraping hides. And then there are the grindstones, heavy slabs used to crush grains or seeds into flour, smoothed from years of circular motion. Their surfaces still carry the fingerprint of use, as if someone had just walked away. In Libya and Niger, archaeologists have uncovered small figurines carved from stone or clay, some shaped like animals, others like human forms. Their purpose isn't fully known. Were they toys, symbols, sacred objects? We may never know, but their presence speaks of thought beyond survival, of a people who created not just tools, but symbols, not just containers, but stories. Some of the oldest artifacts come from places once fed by ancient rivers, where sediment buried objects quickly and preserved them in layers of mud. As scientists dig deeper, they often find not just single items, but entire clusters, as if an old camp or settlement had been paused, frozen, and buried whole. One site in western Egypt revealed a row of storage pits, still lined with the remains of woven baskets. Nearby, a set of stone weights used for fishing nets. Further on, a cluster of clay jars once used to hold water, sealed with lids still intact. Each find adds another thread to the picture of life in a land we no longer recognize. And while the bigger discoveries, bones, buildings, graves, may get the headlines, it's often these smaller items that speak the loudest. A flint scraper worn down at the edge suggests repeated use by one hand. A set of beads found in a child's grave reveals not just decoration, but care. A decorated bowl with a crack sealed by pitch tells us that it mattered enough to repair. Together, these artifacts act like echoes, not loud enough to shout their meaning, but clear enough to hint at what once was. Every pottery shard is a puzzle piece, every chipped stone a reminder. These were not nameless, faceless people swept away by time. They were individuals, families, artists, workers, dreamers, and the objects they left behind, simple as they may seem, carry pieces of their personalities across millennia. Even now, sandstorms still shift and uncover new fragments. Sometimes it's a single bead catching the sun just right. Other times it's an entire scatter of tools left behind after a hunt. And in rare cases, it's something no one expected, a necklace made of river shells, found hundreds of miles from the nearest coast, suggesting trade routes we're only beginning to understand. But the sands also hide more than they reveal. For every item found, hundreds more remain buried, sheltered under dunes, tucked into dry riverbeds, cradled in ancient sediment, waiting. And scientists know that what's already been found is only the beginning, because every artifact, no matter how small, points toward a larger truth, not just about objects, but about people, about memory, and about a Sahara that, beneath all its silence, still holds the voices of those who came before. If you were to fly high above the Sahara, past the dunes and the dry basins, beyond the ancient lakes and lost rivers, you'd eventually spot something strange, something that doesn't quite match the landscape around it. At first, it might look like a ripple in the sand, or the impression of a giant fossil pressed into the earth. But as you get closer, it becomes clear. It's a massive ring, perfectly circular, concentric, like the eye of a giant staring silently up at the sky. It's called the Richat structure, but most people know it by another name, the Eye of the Sahara. This mysterious formation sits in Mauritania, a country in the western part of the desert. From the ground, it's hard to make out its shape. You might think you're just walking through low hills and rocky plains, but from space it reveals itself completely. A bullseye pattern, more than 25 miles wide, wide enough to swallow an entire city. Its rings stretch out in bands of brown, red, gray, and tan, layered like the bark of a tree, but carved into the earth itself. And what makes it even stranger is that it doesn't quite look like anything else around it. The Sahara is full of dunes and rock outcrops, but nothing with this kind of perfect layered symmetry. It's no wonder astronauts first noticed it clearly when orbiting the planet. And since then, scientists have been asking the same question. What exactly is it? For a long time, the Eye of the Sahara was thought to be the scar of a massive impact, a crater left behind by a meteor strike. The shape, after all, is just about right. Round, deep, raised in the center. That's how many craters appear after a violent collision. But as researchers studied it more closely, the evidence didn't quite match. There was no trace of melted rock, no signs of the intense pressure or shock waves that normally come with space impacts. Whatever shaped the eye, it wasn't something that crashed down from above. Instead, most scientists now believe it was formed from below by geological forces deep within the Earth. They think it's a type of domed uplift created when molten rock pushed upward millions of years ago, bulging the land into a dome. Over time, wind and water began to wear it down. The soft layers eroded faster than the hard ones, carving out the ringed structure we see today. The result is something both natural and rare, a kind of giant fingerprint left behind by the Earth's shifting crust. But even with this explanation, there are still puzzles. For one, why is it so perfectly circular? Nature tends to be messy, broken, irregular, yet the eye seems too precise, too symmetrical to be the result of random erosion. Its center is raised, and the rings follow each other like ripples in a pond, wide, even, smooth. Some researchers suggest additional tectonic forces may have been at play, shaping the dome more cleanly than usual. Others aren't fully convinced the mystery is solved. And then there are the legends. For centuries, local nomads have passed down stories about the eye. Some say it's the remains of an ancient city lost to time. Others claim it has spiritual or cosmic meaning. And in recent years, the internet has sparked even wilder theories. Some people point to its shape and wonder, could this be the real location of Atlantis? That idea, the Atlantis theory, gained attention after people compared Plato's writings with the structure's appearance. Plato described a city with concentric rings surrounded by water with a central island. The Eye of the Sahara has concentric rings. It lies near the Atlantic. And if it was once green and wet, as we now know parts of the Sahara were, the idea doesn't seem quite as far-fetched as it once did. Still, there's no solid evidence connecting it to Atlantis, no ruins, no writing, just shape and speculation. But the mystery keeps people curious. Even for scientists, the eye remains partly unexplained. Its rocks are ancient, some dating back more than 100 million years. But the rings themselves appear to have formed more recently, as erosion sculpted the dome. The minerals found in its layers include quartzite, volcanic rock, and sediment from long dry rivers, all hinting at a complex, shifting history beneath the surface. And so, the eye continues to watch, quiet, vast, and strange, a place where geology and imagination meet, a place where time has carved a secret into stone and left it wide open for us to see. Yet, even as satellites scan it and experts debate its origin, the eye gives no clear answers. It simply waits, a spiral of stone in the middle of nowhere, reminding us that the Sahara still holds shapes and stories we have yet to fully understand. Standing at the edge of the Eye of the Sahara, one might feel as though the landscape itself is trying to whisper something, something old, something half forgotten. The concentric rings stretch out wide, tracing patterns that feel too deliberate to be accidental, and yet too ancient to be fully understood. This quiet tension between what we see and what we know has given rise to a mystery that refuses to settle. Scientists, of course, have worked hard to explain the Richat structure. The current consensus leans toward natural erosion, a slow sculpting of rock over millions of years. When the Earth's crust bulged upward from deep tectonic forces, it created a dome of different rock layers. Over time, wind and rain carved away the softer layers, revealing the harder ones underneath. The result was a geologic fingerprint, wide and ringed, etched into the surface of the Sahara. But erosion alone doesn't always satisfy the human eye, not when the lines are so even, not when the structure resembles a perfect spiral viewed from the sky. So other ideas have taken root, some grounded in science, others in imagination. One of the earliest alternate theories was that the eye was the result of a meteor impact. The round shape certainly fits, and for years it was listed in some textbooks as an impact crater. But careful study found no evidence of the shock melted rock or high pressure minerals typically left behind by such an event. The structure also lacks the raised rim or chaotic floor common in confirmed craters. So while it may look the part, the impact theory has lost much of its support. Still, the symmetry remains, and symmetry often invites speculation. Perhaps the most compelling and controversial theory to gain traction in popular circles is the idea that the Eye of the Sahara is the long lost city of Atlantis. This theory leans heavily on the writings of Plato, who described Atlantis as a circular city built in rings of land and water. He wrote of a civilization with advanced engineering, lush surroundings, and a tragic end, swallowed by floods and time. Some who study his work note the similarities: the round shape, the isolation, the size, and if, as we've seen, parts of the Sahara were once green and filled with rivers and lakes, could this place, hidden under sand for thousands of years, match that ancient description? Supporters of the Atlantis theory point out that the eye's dimensions roughly match those Plato gave. They highlight the structure's central island like dome, the bands of alternating rock that resemble canals, and its proximity to where Plato said Atlantis once lay, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which many associate with the Strait of Gibraltar. If one reimagines the Sahara not as a desert, but as a lush coastal region in the distant past, the theory begins to sound less like fantasy and more like a forgotten possibility. But this idea remains speculative. No temples have been found, no inscriptions, no evidence of a human built city structure, just layers of ancient rock shaped by natural forces and left exposed to curious minds. And so, the theory lives mostly in documentaries, forums, and the minds of dreamers who wonder what secrets might still sleep beneath the sand. Other researchers offer a different view entirely. They suggest the Rishat structure isn't just a geological oddity, it's also a cultural mirror, a place that reflects our tendency to see patterns, to seek stories where none may exist. Just as some people see faces in clouds or animals in stars, we look at the rings of the Sahara and see a lost city, a giant's eye, a message left by nature, or something more. And perhaps that search for meaning is just as important as the facts themselves. Even among scientists, there's a quiet sense of awe when they speak about the eye. It's a reminder that Earth still holds places where the answers aren't fully known, where radar can scan and soil samples can be tested, but no single conclusion can close the book. The eye resists easy definition. It sits between disciplines: geology, archaeology, mythology, offering clues but no final truth. The winds that now sweep through its ridges carry grains of sand that have passed over lost lakes and buried tools, over fossils of whales and stone beads from forgotten hands. The earth remembers in layers, not words, and the eye seems to gaze back at us with questions of its own. As the sun sets across the Sahara, the light softens and the rings of the eye fade into shadow. The silence feels ancient, not empty, but full of echoes, of possibilities, of stories we haven't yet uncovered. Whatever its origin, whether carved by wind or built by minds long vanished, the eye reminds us that even the most desolate landscapes may still hold the shape of wonder. If we could step back in time, not just by centuries, but by tens of thousands of years, we would see the Sahara transforming again and again, not just once from green to dry, but over and over in a slow, rhythmic dance, shaped by forces far above our heads. These weren't sudden changes like a flash flood or a wildfire. They moved like whispers on a cosmic scale, tied to something almost invisible, the very tilt of the Earth itself. The Sahara pump theory offers a way to understand this long repeating cycle. It's not a machine, despite the word pump, but rather a pattern, a natural heartbeat in Earth's climate system. It explains how the Sahara has switched between being a lush green world full of rivers and wildlife and a dry, windswept desert stretching from coast to coast. And the strange part is, it's still happening, just too slowly for us to notice day by day. To begin understanding this theory, we have to look at the Earth as it moves through space. Our planet doesn't stand still, it wobbles, like a spinning top that slowly shifts its lean. Earth's axis tilts back and forth over long periods, roughly every 20,000 to 25,000 years. This slow wobble changes how sunlight falls on different parts of the planet during different times of the year. And when that sunlight shifts, so does everything else: the rain, the wind, the heat, and life itself. During some periods, the Earth's tilt causes the northern hemisphere to receive stronger summer sunlight. When that happens, the sun heats up the land more intensely, especially in places like North Africa. The result is more rising air, which helps pull in moist winds from the ocean. These winds bring rain, not just a little, but enough to change everything. The dry land softens, grasses grow, lakes form, animals return, the desert breathes green again. This is the wet phase of the Sahara pump. The landscape becomes fertile, almost like a giant invitation to life. Plants flourish, animals migrate in, and even humans follow, settling near water, hunting game, and building communities. The Sahara becomes a bridge, not a barrier, connecting people and species between Africa and other continents. But then the wobble keeps turning. The Earth's tilt shifts again, and the northern hemisphere receives less intense summer sunlight. Without the strong heating, those moist winds weaken, rainfall decreases, the air dries out. Slowly, the green begins to fade, lakes shrink, forests thin, rivers stop flowing, and little by little, the desert creeps back in. This is the dry phase, the pump pulling life back out. It's not a sudden collapse, it happens over thousands of years. But from the sky, the pattern is clear. Like a breath drawn in and slowly exhaled, the Sahara expands and contracts. Wet becomes dry, and dry becomes wet again, depending on the angle of sunlight hitting the earth. The pump in the theory's name doesn't just describe the landscape, it also refers to how this cycle pushes species and even people across continents. When the Sahara is green, animals like elephants, giraffes, and even hippos can move between sub Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. When it dries out, they retreat. This movement has shaped evolution itself. It's not just weather, it's life's steering wheel. Some scientists believe this back and forth has even influenced human migration out of Africa. During the wet phases, greener corridors may have opened up across the Sahara, allowing early humans to travel north into Europe and beyond. Then, as the desert returned, those paths closed again, like doors opening and shutting in slow motion, guided by Earth's quiet wobble. And it's not just the tilt that plays a role. Other long term changes, like shifts in Earth's orbit and the shape of that orbit, add more layers to this cosmic rhythm. Together, these movements create what scientists call Milankovitch cycles, which influence ice ages, monsoons, and desert blooms all over the world. The Sahara pump theory is just one part of that larger pattern. What makes this idea so powerful is that it ties geology, climate, biology, and even history together. It shows us that deserts aren't fixed, forests aren't forever. The land beneath our feet is not permanent, it breathes with the sky. And though the Sahara today looks still, its story is far from over. The Earth's tilt is still shifting, the pump is still working, and though we may not live long enough to see the desert bloom again, the cycle continues, quietly shaping the world one grain of sand at a time. As the Sahara shifted with the rhythm of the Earth's tilt, its transformation didn't just change the landscape, it quietly redrew the map of human movement. What is now seen as a hostile expanse of sand was once a vibrant corridor, teeming with rivers, grasslands, and life. And in that temporary green window, early humans didn't merely survive, they journeyed, explored, and expanded. This changing environment wasn't just a backdrop, it was a bridge. When we picture the migrations of our ancient ancestors, we often imagine small bands of early humans leaving East Africa, crossing through the Sinai Peninsula, and eventually spreading across Asia and Europe. But recent discoveries are forcing that old map to be redrawn. It turns out that the Sahara, green and alive during the African humid period, offered an entirely different route. Instead of being an obstacle, the Sahara became a passage. The ancient lakes, rivers, and fertile plains made travel possible, even attractive. People could walk alongside herds of migrating animals, fish in flowing streams, and gather food from the landscape. Archaeological findings scattered across what is now barren desert, tools, hearths, carvings, and burial sites hint at thriving communities that once called this place home. These weren't just nomads passing through. These were people who settled, stayed, and shaped their lives around water and abundance. Some of the earliest signs of this movement have been uncovered in unexpected places. Rock shelters in the central Sahara contain paintings that show humans and animals living side by side. In regions like Tassili Najer, engraved figures appear on canyon walls, dancing, herding cattle, paddling boats. These images aren't just art, they're evidence of presence, of real lives unfolding in what is now some of the driest land on Earth. But it wasn't only within Africa that this green Sahara had impact. As the climate supported movement northward, human populations likely used this corridor to cross into the Mediterranean basin. Instead of a narrow bottleneck through the Sinai, there were multiple routes, broader, greener, and more supportive of long term travel. Some scientists now believe that waves of early humans may have entered Europe from North Africa during these wet phases, leaving genetic and cultural traces that shaped the continent's future. Genetic evidence supports this theory. Studies of ancient DNA reveal connections between North African populations and those of Southern Europe and the Middle East, suggesting that migration wasn't a one time event, but an ongoing relationship. These weren't isolated peoples, they were linked by land, water, and movement. As the desert breathed in and out, so did human expansion, pulsing across thousands of years. Even more intriguing is how these migrations may have seeded the earliest sparks of civilization. Settlements that began in the Green Sahara may have laid the groundwork for organized societies, long before the famous river valleys of the Nile or the Tigris Euphrates took center stage. People who learned to live in harmony with changing climates, farming in wetter years, storing in drier ones, carried those skills with them as they moved. In this way, the Sahara wasn't just a road, it was a classroom. As the land dried once more and the green disappeared, these migrating groups brought their knowledge with them to new environments. Some followed the retreating rains southward, contributing to the development of civilizations along the Niger River. Others moved north, where their descendants would later influence early Mediterranean cultures. What they left behind beneath the sand, pottery shards, stone tools, burial mounds, is only part of their legacy. The rest lives on in languages, customs, and the paths we still walk today. Technology is helping to trace these journeys more clearly. By comparing genetic patterns, analyzing buried artifacts, and mapping ancient routes with satellite imagery, scientists are uncovering a more connected and complex picture of early human movement. It no longer makes sense to think of the Sahara as empty or impassable. Instead, it becomes a central chapter in the story of how humanity spread across continents. This rewriting of migration history doesn't just shift a few lines on a map, it transforms our understanding of who we are and where we've been. It reminds us that climate, landscape, and survival are deeply intertwined, that deserts can become highways, that lost rivers can shape destinies, and that every grain of sand once lay beneath someone's footsteps. As early humans moved through the green corridors of the Sahara, they didn't just leave footprints, they laid down invisible trails that would, over time, become the foundations of connection. Long before it became a symbol of emptiness and isolation, the Sahara was something else entirely. Not a wall, but a web. Not a barrier, but a bridge. The image of the Sahara as a vast and lifeless divide between North Africa and sub Saharan regions is deeply rooted in our modern imagination. Today, it stretches nearly 3,000 miles across, scorching during the day, freezing at night, with little water or shelter in sight. But this wasn't always its nature. During its greener phases, the Sahara served as a wide open avenue, a living highway where cultures didn't just pass, they mingled. Evidence of this movement is subtle but powerful. Rock art found deep in the desert reveals more than just scenes of everyday life. It reveals shared symbols, repeated styles, and overlapping themes, hints of cultural contact that stretched across great distances. In different corners of the Sahara, similar carvings of cattle, humans, and spiraling patterns appear, suggesting a kind of visual language that traveled with the people who etched it. Trade, too, found its early roots in this expanse. As communities settled around rivers and lakes, they began to produce more than they needed, and with surplus came exchange. Salt, minerals, obsidian, animal hides, and even beads crafted from seashells made their way across the landscape. Each item carried not just value, but a story, a tale of where it came from and the hands it passed through. And then, as the climate slowly shifted again, the green began to fade. But movement did not stop. People adapted, learning to navigate longer distances between shrinking water sources. Some began to specialize in desert travel, becoming the early ancestors of the traders and caravans that would one day define trans Saharan commerce. The desert's transformation forced ingenuity. Camels, introduced much later, revolutionized long distance travel across the arid plains. But even before their arrival, humans had begun mapping mental blueprints of wells, stars, and sheltering rocks. These mental maps weren't written down, but passed orally, from parent to child, from guide to traveler, forming a deep memory of the land that could not be seen, but never truly disappeared. As ancient cities rose and fell along the edges of the desert, from the Mediterranean coast to the Sahel, the Sahara continued to function as a connector. When the Garamantes built their underground water systems, they weren't isolated inventors. They were in dialogue with neighboring cultures, exchanging ideas as well as goods. Gold, ivory, leather, and even enslaved peoples would eventually flow north. In return came textiles, glassware, books, and architecture. The Sahara did not divide, it carried. Linguistic echoes reveal even more. Words from Berber, Songhai, Arabic, and other languages show traces of interaction that cannot be explained by conquest alone. These are the signs of long, slow blending, the kind that happens when people share not just markets, but meals, stories, and marriages. Across dunes and stone plateaus, a quiet multicultural world once thrived, built not on walls, but on ways through. Modern archaeological techniques like aerial surveys and ground penetrating radar have begun to expose remnants of ancient paths, tracks worn into stone, ruins of way stations, and traces of once buried camps tell a story that contradicts the myth of emptiness. These findings show that people knew how to live here, how to move here, and how to build connections across a land that constantly shifted beneath their feet. Today, the Sahara may appear as a blank space on the map, a place where the GPS shows little but sand, but in truth, it holds centuries of movement, echoing with footsteps and voices carried on dry winds. Beneath the stillness lies a network of trails that once linked kingdoms, connected families, and spread knowledge from one world to another. And so, the next time the desert is seen as an end, it may be worth imagining it instead as a beginning, a place not to be feared or avoided, but once embraced, because hidden in its silence is the hum of ancient journeys and the memory of a land that once brought worlds together. As the Sahara pulsed between desert and savanna, its shifting waters shaped more than just the land beneath it. They shaped the rivers that carried life far beyond the sands. Among these rivers, one in particular grew into something much greater than a body of water. It became a lifeline, a source of myth and memory, and eventually the cradle of one of the most powerful civilizations in human history. That river was the Nile. To understand how the Sahara influenced the Nile, we must look at the ancient rains that once soaked the desert. During the African humid period, when the Sahara bloomed with grasslands, the entire climate of North Africa shifted. Monsoons pushed farther north, and the land that today lies silent and cracked was then alive with lakes, rivers, and flowing vegetation. This wasn't a scattered patch of greenery, it was a sweeping system of watersheds that fed not only local life, but vast regional networks. Among these systems was the Tamanrasset River, a now buried super river that once threaded its way across the western Sahara. But in the east, rainfall from the mountains and highlands would have also helped feed the young Nile basin. These rains didn't just fall in isolation, they collected, they pooled, and they drained slowly downhill, their channels carving paths that joined the larger river that flowed steadily toward the Mediterranean. This connection between Sahara rainfall and Nile flow might seem like a stretch, especially when we picture the desert as we know it today, dry, endless, unforgiving. But sediment cores taken from the Nile Delta tell a different story. Buried deep within them are layers of fine, silty deposits, rich in organic material that could only have come from the kind of intense erosion seen in wetter times. These layers line up with the timing of the African humid period, suggesting that heavy rainfall upstream, some of it from regions now part of the Sahara, was feeding the Nile in ways that would have made its waters even more abundant and reliable. This steady, nourishing flow was more than a natural event, it was a gift. It created floodplains, rich in minerals. It refreshed the soil after each season. It brought fish, birds, and silt, all the ingredients of life. And along these banks, people settled. They planted wheat, barley, flax, they raised cattle and goats. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and eventually pharaohs would rise from the same soil, watered by ancient rains that once touched the Sahara's grass. The annual flooding of the Nile, known as the inundation, became the beating heart of Egyptian time. It wasn't just a seasonal event, it was the calendar. Life revolved around its rhythm, and though the Egyptians believed these floods came from the tears of the goddess Isis or the gifts of the gods, the truth may have started hundreds of miles to the west in storms over what is now sand. When the Sahara began to dry, the flow of water from its once green reaches slowed, but by then the Nile had already carved a path through the continent, pulling from highland rains farther south. It adapted, and so did the people. But those early years, the formative centuries of Nile society, were built on a foundation soaked by Sahara fed waters. Without them, the initial fertility of the Nile's banks might have been far less dependable, and the rise of Egypt as we know it less certain. This connection between the Nile and the Sahara also reshaped how people moved. As the desert grew, migration shifted toward the dependable river valley. Groups who once roamed greener pastures to the west began to settle permanently near the riverbanks. Their skills, their memories of managing water and adapting to changing climates didn't vanish. They became part of Nile culture. They influenced the tools, the crops, the architecture. What once thrived in the open savanna now took root in the narrow cradle of the Nile. Even today, the echoes of this hydrological partnership remain. The cataracts of the Nile, the twists and turns of its course, the underground aquifers that still run beneath Egypt and Sudan, all are remnants of a wetter world. And when scientists map the Nile's past, they often find themselves tracing lines back into the heart of the Sahara, where ghost rivers once flowed and green hills once rose. So while the Nile may seem like a world apart from the desert that flanks it, their histories are intertwined. The breath of life that gave rise to pyramids, papyrus, and pharaohs may have first gathered as clouds over a Sahara that for a time knew the sound of falling rain. As we trace the footprints of ancient rivers, lost civilizations, and buried lakes across the Sahara, another thought begins to take shape, a quiet, distant echo from a planet far away. Mars, with its rust colored surface and whispering dust storms, may seem worlds apart from Earth, and yet strangely, the two deserts begin to resemble each other the more we look closely. Dry, wind-swept, marked by time and silence, and once perhaps alive with water. Scientists have long looked to Earth's extreme environments as windows into other worlds. Among them, the Sahara stands out as one of the closest natural analogs to Mars. It's not just the dryness or the vastness, it's the history etched in its rocks, the stories hidden beneath its surface, and the way ancient water once shaped its ground, only to vanish and leave behind clues, the same kind of clues we search for on the red planet. Take the dried up riverbeds on Mars, seen through satellite images, meandering channels that resemble the ghost rivers of the Sahara. Some are carved so deeply into the Martian soil that they could only have been formed by flowing water, not wind. And the more we learn about these Martian valleys, the more they remind us of the ones buried beneath African sand. Their shapes, their curves, their deltas all whisper the same possibility. Mars, too, once had a water rich past. To better understand that possibility, scientists study places like the Tassili Niger Plateau in Algeria. Its rocky surface, baked under centuries of sun, is marked with cracks, grooves, and mineral stains, features that look almost identical to those found in Martian terrain. By examining how Earth's desert rocks respond to wind, temperature shifts, and the long term absence of water, researchers can start to interpret similar markings on Mars. Each scar on the stone becomes a page in a shared story. Even the dust itself tells a tale. The fine particles that coat the Sahara's surface, whipped into motion by sudden gusts, move in patterns that look eerily similar to the sweeping dust devils captured by Martian rovers. These mini storms, while harmless on Earth, are powerful forces on Mars. They sculpt dunes, erase tracks, and possibly stir hidden elements beneath the surface. By watching how dust behaves in the Sahara, we learn how it might act on Mars, revealing or covering up evidence of a wetter time. There's also life to consider, not the complex life of forests or oceans, but the tiny, stubborn kind that clings to cracks in dry rock and hides deep below the sand. In some of the Sahara's harshest corners, scientists have discovered microbial life still surviving, drawing moisture from the air or eking out energy from minerals. These extremophiles, as they're called, are among Earth's hardiest organisms, and they've become a model for what Martian life, if it ever existed, might have looked like. The search for such life is not only about finding fossils or bones, it's about understanding survival in the harshest possible places. The ancient Sahara, with its shifting climate and disappearing lakes, offers a living laboratory for this quest. If life could adapt here, moving underground, shrinking in size, going dormant for centuries, could it have done the same beneath Mars's surface? Technology strengthens this connection. The same radar systems used to uncover the Tamanrasset River and buried aquifers in Africa have been adapted for Martian exploration. Orbiters circling Mars use similar instruments to scan beneath its crust, looking for frozen reservoirs or subsurface ice. It's as if the desert has trained us to listen for the quiet signals beneath the silence, first here, then there. Even the rovers, those six-wheeled explorers crossing the Martian plains, are shaped by Earth's deserts. Before they ever touch Martian soil, they're tested in places like the Atacama in Chile or the Sahara's driest corners. Their wheels roll over sun-baked ground, their sensors scan wind-shaped stones, their cameras learn to interpret light filtered through dust. In every test, they're preparing to meet a landscape that feels oddly familiar. So when we study the Sahara, we're not just looking into our past, we're also gazing outward, imagining another world that may have once flowed with rivers and shimmered with lakes, now buried beneath time and red dust. The echoes we find beneath our feet might be whispering across planets, connecting Earth's forgotten history with Mars's hidden one. And with every layer we uncover in the Sahara, we take one step closer to understanding what may still lie waiting in the silence of another desert. This one, 140 million miles away. Beneath the blistering sun and wind scoured rocks, life quietly persists in places most would call lifeless. It doesn't announce itself with lush greenery or loud animal calls. Instead, it clings to existence in near invisible ways, tucked into the tiniest cracks, buried deep below the surface, or suspended in grains of sand. In the harshest deserts, life hasn't vanished. It's simply learned how to hide, endure, and wait. These remarkable survivors are known as extremophiles, living things that thrive where almost nothing else can. In the Sahara and other arid zones, they've adapted to conditions that mimic what we imagine on other planets: blistering heat by day, freezing cold by night, and almost no water in between. And yet, somehow, they not only survive, they thrive. Some of these organisms are microbes, too small to see with the naked eye, yet they shape entire ecosystems in silence. Deep within desert rocks, microbial colonies form films that shimmer under a microscope. These biofilms act like tiny cities, helping the microbes share nutrients and shelter each other from deadly UV rays. The rocks, often quartz or sandstone, act like a shield, absorbing heat, filtering light, and holding tiny pockets of moisture just long enough for life to grasp on. In the driest parts of the Sahara, scientists have discovered cyanobacteria nestled inside stones, surviving on light and microscopic amounts of water pulled from the morning air. These organisms are photosynthetic. They make their own food from sunlight, and they've existed for billions of years. The same kind of bacteria once helped oxygenate Earth's atmosphere, and here they are, still doing their quiet work in places that seem empty. Other extremophiles don't live in rocks, but under the sand, a few millimeters below the surface, where the sun doesn't burn quite so fiercely. Microbial life creates thin crust like layers that hold the soil together. These biological soil crusts, or desert skins, may seem lifeless, but they're alive with bacteria, fungi, and algae. Together, they fix nitrogen, trap carbon, and help the land resist erosion. Without them, the desert would crumble even faster. In some dry basins, salt flats stretch out like cracked glass. These places appear utterly barren, white, blinding, and hard as stone. But hidden in the salt crystals are halophiles, salt loving microbes that thrive where most cells would collapse. They float in tiny brine pockets or form pinkish colonies along the crust. Some can go dormant for years, then wake up when rain briefly returns. Their ability to wait quietly and patiently speaks to a deeper kind of resilience, one shaped not by strength but by stillness. Even animals in these deserts show traces of extremophile behavior. The Sahara silver ant, for instance, has adapted to be active during the hottest part of the day when most creatures hide. Its silvery body reflects sunlight and it uses heat to its advantage, foraging quickly before predators emerge. Its entire life is a race against heat, and yet it manages to flourish where others fail. Further underground, other organisms lie in wait. Deep in ancient aquifers and sandstone layers, isolated from the surface for thousands of years, microbial life continues in slow motion. These subsurface extremophiles feed on minerals, generate their own chemical energy, and never see the sun. They live in total darkness, often in complete silence, and their existence raises a haunting question. If life can persist here, what might be possible in other deep, dark places, beneath ice, under oceans, or across planets? The tools used to uncover these tiny survivors are as precise as the creatures themselves. Scientists take great care to avoid contamination, wearing sterilized suits, using specially cleaned drills, and studying samples in vacuum sealed labs. Every trace of life found is tested, double checked, and often met with awe, because each one reminds us that life doesn't need comfort to begin, it only needs a chance. These discoveries don't just change how we see deserts, they change how we see life itself. Resilience isn't loud, it doesn't always look like growth or movement. Sometimes it's a slow breath in the shadows, a flicker beneath a stone, a cell that waits for a better day. And in this waiting, we find something extraordinary, not just about deserts, but about Earth. In the places we once called empty, life whispers back, reminding us that nothing is truly still. Not the sand, not the silence, not even the smallest spark of being. Long before satellites and spreadsheets tracked the rise and fall of temperatures, the Earth kept its own records, written not in ink, but in layers of rock, sand, pollen, and bone. The Sahara is one of its oldest journals. Every grain of sand, every buried lake bed, every fossilized tree root holds a line in the story of shifting winds, changing rains, and a planet always in motion. But this story is not finished. In fact, it's starting to echo. As scientists dig through ancient lake sediments and study dust layers trapped in glaciers thousands of miles away, they're finding patterns, cycles of wet and dry, warmth and cold, life and silence. These patterns whisper of a climate that has never been still. What was once green became gold. What was once full became forgotten. And then sometimes green returned again. This natural rhythm, the rising and falling of rains, the slow drift of vegetation across the land, is shaped by forces we're only beginning to fully understand. Earth's tilt shifts slightly over time, wobbling like a slow spinning top. Its orbit stretches and contracts in long cycles. These subtle changes, known as Milankovitch cycles, alter how sunlight falls across the planet. In turn, they gently push climates toward different states, wetter or drier, warmer or cooler. In the Sahara, these changes once invited lush grasses to bloom and then, centuries later, swept them away with silence. But while those ancient shifts played out over tens of thousands of years, today's changes are happening faster, much faster. What took millennia is now unfolding in decades, and the signs are everywhere, not just in rising seas and melting glaciers, but in the dry bones of places like the Sahara. By looking backward, scientists are learning how ecosystems collapsed or survived when the climate changed. They're asking what made life hang on and what made it disappear. One lesson stands out clearly: water is everything. In the Sahara's past, even small shifts in rainfall meant the difference between abundance and emptiness. A few degrees of temperature, a few inches of rain, those tiny changes rewrote the entire map of life. Whole civilizations rose when the rains came and vanished when they stopped. This delicate balance offers a warning. If the climate of a single region can swing so dramatically with slight nudges, then today's global shifts, fueled not by natural cycles, but by greenhouse gases, may tip the scale much more abruptly. The Sahara also reminds us of thresholds, tipping points beyond which things don't return easily. Once a lake dries out, it doesn't fill again with the next rainfall. Its bed becomes dust, its fish disappear, its shores crumble, and when an entire landscape crosses a point of no return, the life it once supported may never come back. Understanding these thresholds in the past can help scientists predict where they might be today, what forests, rivers, or coastlines are nearing the edge. Another insight comes from the silence between green phases. During the driest times, the Sahara didn't just sit idle, it stored memories, seeds buried deep in the soil, underground water waiting in aquifers, even genetic clues tucked into desert microbes. When the climate softened again, life returned, sometimes quickly, as if it had just been sleeping. This resilience offers hope too. It suggests that with careful restoration, some damaged ecosystems today might one day heal. Still, the ancient Sahara didn't face roads, cities, and industry. It didn't have dams interrupting rivers or carbon thickening the skies. Today's world is far more complex and far more fragile, which is why these lessons are urgent. They're not just about weather, they're about survival. Modern technology lets us study these past changes in stunning detail. Isotopes in fossil shells tell us what the water was like. Pollen grains buried in old lake beds reveal the plants that once grew. Even wind-blown dust from the Sahara, now trapped in ice cores in Greenland, tells us how far the desert's breadth once reached. Together, these pieces help build climate models, showing us not just what happened, but what could happen next. And while the Earth will keep shifting with or without us, the choices we make now, how we use energy, water, land, will shape whether we swing with it or stumble. The past does not give us all the answers, but it offers a mirror. In the Sahara's long memory, we see a reflection of our own future, not as prophecy, but as possibility. In the Sahara, silence is not the absence of sound, it is its own kind of presence, vast, breathing, and alive in ways that surprise the senses. When people speak of the desert, they often imagine heat, sand, and endless sky. But few talk about its voice. Yet, if you sit still long enough, you begin to hear it, not with your ears at first, but with your skin, your bones, your breath. The desert doesn't shout, it hums. Out here, far from roads or cities, every sound stretches for miles. A single pebble disturbed underfoot cracks like a dropped coin in a cathedral. The whisper of wind over a dune becomes a moving instrument, brushing grains into a slow, sweeping rhythm. It's in this quiet that the Sahara reveals one of its strangest and most haunting features: booming sand dunes. Yes, the sand sings, not metaphorically, but literally. Certain dunes, under just the right conditions, produce deep, vibrating sounds like a low, steady drum roll or the echo of a distant thunderstorm. These booming dunes, as scientists call them, are found in only a few places on Earth, and the Sahara holds some of the most powerful. The sound begins when dry sand avalanches down the slope of a steep dune, often triggered by footsteps or wind. As the grains slide, they begin to rub and collide in perfect unison. This synchronized movement creates a strange acoustic wave, loud enough to be heard over 10 kilometers away. It's not a sharp sound, it's a long, resonant growl, almost like the earth is sighing through its skin. No musical instrument is involved. No animal or human creates it. Just sand, just movement, just air. And yet, the tone can last for minutes, as if the dune itself is holding a note. Scientists have tried to measure it and found that each dune has its own pitch, like keys on a giant natural piano. Some hum in B flat, others in C sharp. The frequency depends on the size of the grains, their moisture, and how tightly they're packed together. It's a concert of physics, tuned by geology. And then there's the silence that follows. A silence so complete, it almost rings, with no trees, no birdsong, no insects buzzing. The Sahara becomes a chamber where even stillness has texture. This is not the silence of sleep, it's the silence of space. Deep, weightless, absolute. And yet, even here, sound finds a way in. When the wind rises, it sculpts the dunes not just with shape, but with sound. It hisses along ridges, whistles through cracks in the rock, and builds gusts that roar briefly before dying away. In narrow desert canyons, wind can create a kind of eerie flute, a hollow echoing tone that bounces between the stone walls. Travelers have described it as ghost-like, even unnerving, especially at night when visibility disappears, but the air keeps moving. Even the creatures that call the Sahara home move with a kind of quiet logic. Many are nocturnal, stepping softly through the cool sand to avoid detection. A fox's paw, a beetle's scratch, a lizard's quick dart. Sounds so small they vanish the moment they're made, leaving only a ripple in the silence behind them. Yet sometimes it's not just natural sound that breaks the quiet. Nomadic groups who cross the Sahara have long used sound for survival. The Tuareg, for instance, have songs passed down through generations, sung in low tones during nighttime gatherings around the fire. Their poetry, their music, becomes a lifeline, not just for culture, but for orientation. In a landscape that shifts daily, songs can hold direction better than maps. A melody might trace a route. A verse might hold the memory of a well. Even ancient travelers left their acoustic marks. Rock shelters and canyon walls sometimes hold evidence of clapping or echo games, places where people discovered that even sound could play in this strange open world. In some caves, archaeologists have found that striking certain walls creates different tones, as if the rock itself could be played like a drum. Whether this was used in ritual, celebration, or simple curiosity, we may never know. But it shows something important, that long before microphones or sonar, humans were already listening. And there is one more secret the Sahara keeps. When the sun finally sinks below the dunes and the cold night comes rushing in, the wind softens, the stars sharpen, and the quiet becomes so deep, some travelers say you can hear your own heartbeat echo back at you, as if the desert is listening too. Beneath the golden dunes of the Sahara, time sleeps with secrets no eye has seen and no hand has touched. With every gust of wind that reshapes the ridges, with every storm that pulls a curtain across the sand, something ancient may be hiding just a few feet below, cities swallowed whole, waiting to be remembered. We already know this desert has buried stories. Pieces have surfaced in scattered places, pottery in rock shelters, tools unearthed near dried lake beds, bones resting in long forgotten graves. But what if these are only fragments of something much larger? Not isolated communities, but full cities with walls, streets, markets, temples still intact, still hidden. Modern satellite scans have begun to peel back the surface. Using remote sensing tools like LiDAR and radar that can penetrate sand, researchers have detected strange patterns beneath the dunes, geometric shapes, lines too straight to be natural, and dark patches that hint at structures below. These aren't just mirages from space, they suggest the outlines of buildings, roads, or fortifications buried deep under the desert's silence. In parts of southern Libya and northern Chad, there are rumors passed down through generations, stories of towns that vanished overnight. The Garamantes, who once built underground cities, were likely not the only ones to adapt and thrive here. Their neighbors, rivals, or descendants may have built cities too, ones now completely erased from the visible map, yet not from the earth itself. One of the most intriguing clues comes from the trade routes that once laced across the Sahara. These weren't just paths for camels and salt, they connected kingdoms. And where trade flows, cities often rise. Oasis towns would have grown into hubs of exchange, not just for goods, but for language, culture, and technology. Over time, these centers may have crumbled as the climate dried, but their bones might still lie just beneath the dunes, protected by the very sand that erased them. Explorers in the 19th and 20th centuries spoke of finding stone walls in the middle of nowhere, fragments of masonry with no village nearby. These pieces were often dismissed as outposts or lone ruins, but if seen from above, in their full context, they might belong to something much bigger, networks of buildings, temples, or public spaces. Sometimes a single carved block is all that remains on the surface, while the rest of the city sleeps below, undisturbed for thousands of years. And yet, digging in the Sahara is not like digging anywhere else. The sand moves constantly, winds bury and reveal in unpredictable cycles. Archaeologists face enormous challenges, not just from the heat and remoteness, but from the sheer scale of the desert. It's like looking for a needle in an ocean of shifting dunes. Even with today's technology, it's hard to know where to begin. But the clues are growing. There's a growing belief among scientists that some of the desert's plateaus, once dismissed as barren highlands, may be sitting atop ancient urban centers. Stone structures, possibly once multi storied, now lie collapsed and coated in centuries of dust. In some cases, barely a corner peeks out, mistaken for natural rock, until closer inspection shows evidence of carving or shaping. And then there are the petroglyphs, carved into stone walls across the Sahara, are images of people, cattle, boats, and buildings. Some of these drawings depict scenes that hint at more advanced societies, figures carrying tools, symbols that might represent writing, or designs that resemble blueprints. These aren't random doodles, they are messages from civilizations we barely know. They might be pointing us toward their homes, homes that have been lost to the sands, but not to history. The desert has long been thought of as empty, but the more we learn, the clearer it becomes that it is not empty at all. It is full, full of things we have yet to see, yet to understand, yet to rediscover. Just as the earth once shifted and swallowed the Sahara's lakes, forests, and villages, it may now be slowly giving them back, one artifact, one wall, one whisper at a time. With each new scan, each rare excavation, we step closer to uncovering entire cities that time has hidden. Not myths, not legends, but real places, built by real people whose footsteps were erased, but whose stories may still be waiting beneath the dunes. The desert holds its breath, not out of silence, but because it knows we are finally listening in ways we never could before. Where once archaeologists trudged across burning sand, maps in hand and guesswork guiding them, now the Sahara is being explored by machines that float above it, think for themselves, and see through the surface without ever breaking it. These new tools of discovery, drones, AI, and deep scanning technologies, are reshaping how we learn from the past, using the power of tomorrow to uncover the secrets buried long ago. Drones are often the first to arrive. With a quiet hum, they rise into the air like mechanical hawks, scanning vast landscapes in a fraction of the time it would take a human team. Their cameras, some equipped with multispectral or thermal imaging, capture details invisible to the naked eye. Subtle color changes in the sand, heat signatures from underground rock, or faint outlines where ancient structures once stood. What might appear as a flat plane to a passerby suddenly becomes a canvas full of patterns, lines, and shadows when viewed from above. These aerial surveys can cover hundreds of miles in a day, and because drones can fly low and return often, they're ideal for building layered maps over time. In the Sahara, where dunes shift and surfaces change, this is crucial. It lets researchers track movement, erosion, and exposure, catching a buried wall or road just as the wind uncovers it, before the next storm buries it again. But even drones need help making sense of what they see. That's where artificial intelligence comes in. AI systems, trained on millions of images and data points, can recognize patterns much faster than a human ever could. They can scan through satellite imagery and drone footage and flag potential sites with remarkable accuracy, spotting circles where there might be old wells, grids where buildings could be, or linear paths that might mark ancient roads. These algorithms don't get tired or distracted. They don't overlook something because it doesn't fit what they expect. In fact, AI often finds what we never thought to look for. It's helped uncover ghost settlements in places long dismissed as empty, simply by noticing a repeated shape or an odd break in the terrain. And as more discoveries are made, the AI gets better. Each new find feeds the system more knowledge, sharpening its digital instincts and expanding its reach. But perhaps the most futuristic tools are those that can see into the Earth itself. Ground penetrating radar, or GPR, works like a kind of X ray for the soil. By sending radio waves into the ground, and measuring the echoes that bounce back, GPR creates detailed images of what lies beneath, from layers of sediment to buried walls or tombs. It's been used to detect entire underground complexes without disturbing a single grain of sand. Paired with magnetometry, which detects changes in the Earth's magnetic field caused by human made objects, researchers now have the ability to scan whole landscapes in 3D. These methods reveal not just the presence of artifacts or structures, but how they are arranged, giving insight into the layout of ancient cities, their infrastructure, and their scale. What makes all this even more powerful is that it leaves the past untouched. No trenches, no brushes, no risk of damaging fragile remains. These technologies allow scientists to preserve the very thing they are studying, capturing it in digital layers, and then deciding if or when it's worth digging at all. In a region as delicate and vast as the Sahara, this approach is both practical and respectful. Data collected from these tools is now being turned into interactive maps and 3D reconstructions. Entire ancient cities are being rebuilt, not in stone, but in software, where researchers can virtually walk through alleys, study water systems, or simulate how people lived and moved. This not only helps scholars, it invites anyone with curiosity and an internet connection to explore the hidden world beneath the dunes. As more regions are scanned, a clearer picture of the Sahara's buried story emerges. And with tools growing smarter, faster, and more precise, we're no longer guessing where to look. We're watching the past reveal itself, pixel by pixel, layer by layer. What once required years of travel, digging, and luck now happens in days, guided by the quiet cooperation of sky, code, and signal. And yet, even with all this technology, the desert still decides how much it shows. These tools may read the earth in ways we never imagined, but they do so with care, peeling back the mystery just enough to remind us that discovery is no longer a matter of breaking ground. It's about listening differently, seeing deeper, and trusting that the future might finally be able to read the whispers the past has left behind. Beneath the heat and silence, the Sahara holds its breath, not in stillness, but in waiting. For every fossil we've brushed clean, every stone tool uncovered, every burial site mapped from above, there are 1,000 more tucked under dunes, pressed into dry riverbeds, or etched into canyon walls no one has yet seen. The desert is not done speaking. It never was. We've just only begun to listen. For centuries, explorers crossed these sands chasing legends of hidden oases, golden cities, forgotten tribes. Their maps were blank patches filled with guesses, dragons, or whispers of myth. But as our tools sharpen and our questions deepen, the Sahara begins to respond, not with words, but with hints, a scatter of pottery here, a buried wall there, a bone curled in the shape of sleep, untouched for thousands of years. Still, what we've uncovered so far is just the edge of something larger. Beneath the surface lies a layered library of stories, some half erased by wind, others sealed tight by time. It's not just that the desert is vast, it's that it remembers in silence, and its memory is written not in ink, but in dust and stone. Across its sweep, entire cities may lie waiting, not in the open, but gently smoothed over by centuries of sand. Some might be buried under dunes that shift with every season, their rooftops hidden just a meter below. Others might be locked in dried up lake beds, where water once pooled and people once gathered. There could be temples with walls still standing, inscriptions unweathered by the sun, or graves filled with offerings we've never imagined, carved tools, metalwork, fabrics, musical instruments, perhaps even maps leading to more. Even the dunes themselves are not uniform. Some hide rock shelters deep within them, caves carved into sandstone cliffs, painted with pigments made from earth and fire. These places speak without a sound. They don't rush to tell their stories. They wait for us to be patient enough to see what's there, and humble enough to realize how much we've missed. But it's not only the physical remnants that the Sahara guards, it keeps secrets in the gaps, in the pauses between what we think we know, civilizations we have no names for, languages never written down, traditions passed orally, now lost to the wind, clues that would rewrite timelines, change how we think about migration, about origin, about what it means to be human. Some answers might be hiding in the oldest rocks, where the desert's own bones lie exposed. Minerals layered in ancient formations could whisper of climates far older than any story we've told. Dust trapped in cave walls might reveal what the air once held. Even microscopic traces, pollen grains, spores, ash could chart the comings and goings of forests, herds, and human hands. And while we've learned to scan from space, to map with radar, to predict with algorithms, the truth is the Sahara will only reveal what it chooses. No matter how advanced we become, it remains a landscape that humbles the explorer. For every theory confirmed, another is shattered. For every path uncovered, a new one opens, twisting farther into the unknown. Because the desert isn't just a place, it's a process, a shapeshifter, a memory in motion. What it shows today might be gone tomorrow, swept under a wind that remembers where to hide its treasures. Even footprints, once pressed firm into damp clay, are long since erased. Not because they didn't matter, but because the Sahara never stops sculpting itself. And so we return again and again, guided not just by science, but by wonder, not to conquer or claim, but to ask better questions, to walk softer, to pause longer, because maybe the desert doesn't speak in grand announcements or loud discoveries. Maybe it whispers, and maybe it only tells its secrets to those who know how to wait. The stillness we feel in the Sahara is not emptiness. It is a silence full of breath. It's a desert that has watched everything change and still remains. A place where time folds inward and outward, carrying memory like a song hummed in a language no one speaks anymore. But it's still there, and if we listen closely enough, the wind might carry it to us in the shifting of a dune, the gleam of a stone, the shape of a forgotten tool rising just above the sand. Not finished, not erased, just waiting. Because the Sahara is not done speaking, and the story is far from over. The Sahara stretches beyond the horizon like a quiet reminder that nothing stays the same. To most, it seems like a fixed landscape, eternal, unchanging, endless. But the truth buried beneath its dunes tells a different story, one of motion, one of cycles, one where even the harshest places on earth once held lakes, forests, and laughter. The Sahara is not a place frozen in time, it's time itself, unfolding slowly, shifting silently. And in its vastness, it holds up a mirror to our own world, showing us just how fragile and temporary everything can be. What was once a green world of rivers and animals is now a sun baked desert, and what's now dry may one day be wet again. The desert is not dead, it's in between, between eras, between identities, just as Earth itself always is. From the orbit of satellites, the Sahara looks like a great painting, faded at the edges, brushed by wind and weather. Its surface tells stories of past climates, shifting rains, and vanished seas. From above, ancient riverbeds crisscross like veins, now dry, but once full of motion, connecting lakes, marshes, and people. That constant change isn't just written in the sand, it's written in the sky. Earth's tilt, its orbit, and its wobble all tug at the seasons, pushing rain where there was once drought, and drying up places that used to flood. The Sahara responds like a great clock, ticking forward, pausing, then ticking again. Over tens of thousands of years, the land flips from green to gold and back again, not in sudden jolts, but in rhythms slow enough to miss unless you step far enough back. When we zoom out, when we stretch our view beyond lifetimes and across ages, we begin to see the truth. The desert is not strange, it's expected. It's part of the rhythm, a pulse in Earth's breathing, and it tells us something not just about the past, but about ourselves, about how short our moment really is. Civilizations rise and fall with the tilt of Earth's axis. Whole cities bloom in valleys that later dry into salt. Empires build their stories into stone, and the wind softly erases the edges, not out of cruelty, but out of time. The Sahara teaches this with every gust, every shifting dune. Nothing stands still, not even the ground beneath our feet. And yet, within this motion, there is memory. Fossils beneath the dunes speak of hippos, crocodiles, herds of antelope. Footprints left in soft earth, now hardened, tell of families walking across once green plains. Pottery shards whisper of dinners shared beside lakes that no longer exist. These aren't just echoes of people long gone. They are reminders that even the most familiar landscapes were once different and will be again. The Sahara's surface may appear still, but it holds clues to future change. Dust blown from its plains feeds the Amazon rainforest. Particles settle in distant oceans, carrying ancient minerals with them. One place touching another, continents apart. A single desert feeding the lungs of a jungle, reminding us how deeply everything is connected and how fragile that connection can be. And just as the desert leaves its fingerprints across the globe, so too do our choices now shape what the earth becomes. What we see in the Sahara is not just a record of natural change, it's a warning, a map of how environments can vanish, how fast beauty can slip into memory if we don't listen. Still, the desert isn't bitter, it doesn't blame or boast, it simply endures, and in that endurance is a quiet kind of wisdom, the kind that says, nothing we build is forever. No tower, no border, no road. What seems solid today may be swept away tomorrow by water, by wind, by time. And yet, within that impermanence lies wonder. If everything changed, then anything can. Even deserts can bloom again. Even lost rivers can return. Even forgotten histories can rise to the surface with a shift of sand. The Sahara, in all its silence, holds the possibility of rebirth. So when we look at its endless expanse, we aren't just looking into the past. We're looking into a truth that applies everywhere, to every coastline, every city, every story. That nothing is as permanent as it seems. That time isn't just moving forward, it's circling back, folding over, reshaping the world beneath us. The desert knows this. It's lived it. And through its dunes, dry lakes, buried cities, and ancient skies, it quietly shows us the path we all walk, one of change, of memory, of transformation. The Sahara is not only a mirror of time, it is time reflecting back at us, asking only that we pay attention. Beneath our feet, the ground is not silent, it hums with memory. Layers of earth hold on to the past like a closed book, pages pressed together so tightly we forget they're even there. We walk over stones that once lined ancient roads, across sands that used to border lakes, past hills that may hide the walls of lost cities, not because they're unreachable, but because we've stopped asking what lies underneath. We look up to the stars for mystery. But sometimes the greatest questions are just below our shoes. All across the world, entire landscapes remain unstudied, not because they're out of reach, but because they appear ordinary. Flat stretches of land, empty plains, a patch of desert that seems no different from the one beside it, but just a few inches beneath could be a burial ground, a forgotten village, a fossil untouched for 100,000 years. The earth doesn't give up its secrets easily. It waits, it listens, and it only speaks when someone is ready to hear. Archaeologists have learned this over and over again. Some of the most astonishing finds didn't come from obvious places, they came from accidents. A shepherd tripping on a strange stone, a construction worker digging a trench, a traveler noticing an odd pattern in the soil. These moments aren't guided by maps or machines, they're shaped by attention, a kind of quiet curiosity that asks, what if? In dry lake beds, in deep caves, in canyons and cliffs, nature hides signs in plain sight. A bone sticking out from a hillside, charcoal buried in rock, shells in the middle of the desert. Each is a clue, a whisper that says, there is more here. But too often, the clues go unheard, passed by, paved over, because we weren't listening closely enough, or because we didn't think to look. Technology helps, yes. Drones, satellites, radar, they show us patterns invisible to the eye. But even these tools only work when someone asks the right question. Even with all the machines in the world, discovery still starts with wonder. With someone saying, that looks out of place, or why does this rock feel different? It begins with silence, followed by attention, and not just attention to the ground, but to the stories passed down through generations. Oral traditions, myths, legends, tales of lost rivers, cities swallowed by sand, voices that still echo in the wind. These aren't just fantasy. Often they point to real places, real shifts in the earth that science later confirms. Sometimes what seems like legend is just history we haven't proved yet. Consider the places we overlook, the small corners of the world that don't make headlines. Remote valleys, forgotten mountain passes, tiny islands, places without roads or phone signals or tourist trails. They're not empty, they're waiting, waiting for someone to listen with more than just their ears. The question isn't just what have we missed, it's what are we missing right now. In the rush to build, to move faster, to cover the land with concrete and steel, how many wonders are we paving over? How many signals do we silence in the name of progress? How many fossils turn to dust in rock crushers before anyone sees them? How many footsteps are erased by machines before they can be measured? And it's not just ancient things we miss. Sometimes it's the patterns of the present, animal migrations that shift without explanation, strange sounds in the earth, plants growing where they shouldn't. Nature always speaks, but we often drown it out with noise, with distraction, with certainty. Because to really listen is to admit we don't know everything, that maybe we've only scratched the surface, that the planet is still full of puzzles, and that most of them don't announce themselves with flashing lights. They wait, silently, just below. Maybe a farmer's field holds the remains of an early settlement. Maybe the roots of a tree push through the roof of a buried temple. Maybe a cave wall deep in a canyon hides drawings made before history had names. And maybe the only reason we haven't found them is because we weren't quiet enough to notice. The earth is not done speaking. Its surface may seem calm, even predictable, but its depths are full of forgotten messages. Every dune, every cliff, every grain of soil could be the start of a new story if we learn to slow down, to be still, and to ask better questions. So maybe the real wonder isn't what we've found so far, but what still lies beneath. Not lost, just waiting. Tonight, as you drift off, let your thoughts wander through ancient rivers and forgotten paths, through tombs buried in silence, and skies that once reflected green grass instead of endless sand. Picture the Sahara not as a sea of emptiness, but as a place alive with memory. Imagine the whispers of people long gone, their footsteps softened by time, still echoing beneath layers of dust and stone. Let your mind gently trace those winding ancient shorelines, feel the cool shade of vanished trees, and listen to the soft hush of a desert wind carrying secrets from millennia ago. Close your eyes and float backward through time, to when elephants roamed across what is now sand, to when children played beside lakes now dry and forgotten. Let your imagination settle into quiet camps under starlit skies, beside hearths where stories were once shared in languages we no longer speak. Breathe in the stillness. Listen closely. The ground beneath you might seem still, but it's always murmuring, always holding more than we see. Because the earth remembers. It holds on to laughter, to sorrow, to struggle and joy, pressed into stone, painted on rock, carved into bone. And sometimes, when we pay attention, when we pause long enough to listen, it offers us a glimpse, a shell where there should be none, a fossil in a cliff face, a ruin wrapped in roots, each one a message. You are not the first to walk here. So as you rest, let that wonder drift with you into your dreams. Let it wrap around you like ancient wind, warm and mysterious. Let your thoughts tumble through sand covered doorways and ripple through dried up riverbeds, as if your mind is mapping stories still waiting to be told. And if this journey tonight sparked even a flicker of curiosity, if you found yourself leaning in, wondering what's next, then I invite you to stay close. Like, comment, subscribe, because the earth still whispers, and we're just beginning to hear it. There are more stories buried in the dust, more mysteries folded into stone, and more forgotten voices waiting to rise. And together, we'll listen, one whisper at a time. Sweet dreams, fellow explorer.